Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about Hannah Arendt's very interesting essay, What is Authority in Between Past and Future? This is a really interesting essay. We're going to talk about pyramids and why totalitarianism is kind of like an onion. And along the way she talks about Plato, Aristotle, Christianity, the Christian account of hell, Machiavelli. So we're going to talk about all of that. Arendt begins her essay with a provocative claim that authority has vanished from the modern world. So Arendt says in the modern world we can see that authority has eroded, it's vanished. We've lost our confidence in traditional authorities. And as is often the case with Arendt, she's identified a problem that is recognized across the political spectrum by people on the right and by people on the left. For example, you'll see people on the left complain that not enough people believe in science anymore or trust scientific expertise on issues like climate change or vaccines. On the political right, you'll often hear people complain that people no longer respect institutions or tradition, founding fathers, or the wisdom of more experienced generations. Both sides are arguing in different ways that there is not enough respect for authority, and arguing that the widespread lack of respect for authority is causing political problems. So let's turn to Arendt's main question in this essay: what is authority? Now, precisely because we are the moderns Arendt is talking about, we might be predisposed to distrust authority. But authority may be very important within human communities and human relationships. So why do we need authority? And isn't rule by reason better? Isn't there something arbitrary about rule by authority? Arendt understands authority to be one means of securing obedience or cooperation in political life or human relationships more generally. Now, importantly, Arendt says authority is not rational persuasion, and authority is not violence or force. If you have to use reason or violence to make someone obey you, you have no authority. Authority helps us get things done. Think about a classroom, and think about the difference between a teacher and a substitute teacher. Now, if the substitute teacher has a harder time getting students to listen and getting things done during the school day, it's precisely because the substitute teacher lacks authority. Coaching might be another helpful example. If you've ever played a sport, you've had a coach. Just think about the things that coaches make you do. They might make you work out, run laps, do push-ups, run drills, do things you don't want to do. Now, what is the source of the power they hold over you? In most cases, you can quit a team or stop playing a sport, but we recognize the authority of coaches. We invest them with authority because we understand that their coaching, their authority helps us accomplish certain things, helps us do certain things well. And again, that authority is not beyond question. It can become illegitimate, but when the relationship between coach and athlete is working properly, the athlete respects the authority of the coach. And there's a kind of willed obedience present in this relationship. We're not litigating every single decision. We're not questioning every single thing the coach asks us to do. Authority allows us to decide things and to act more effectively. Would we ever get anything done if people questioned every decision that authority figures made? What if we were even questioning the processes for decision making every time we made a decision? If authority figures had to explain every single decision and respond to every single question, nothing would ever get done. A part of the reason this all matters for Arendt is she seems to think that authority is useful, maybe even necessary within political life. But the problem seems to be that not all authority structures are created equal. Some are conducive to human life and human freedom, and others are not. So one of the dangers of modern life is that precisely because we distrust authority, but we actually maybe need some authority in our lives, we may end up seeking out unhealthy or dangerous forms of authoritarian leadership. Arendt then gives us three very compelling and very useful images to help us distinguish between authoritarian governments, tyrannical governments, and totalitarian governments. So Arendt says first that authoritarian governments are like a pyramid. So at the top of the pyramid, we find the highest position of authority, and at the bottom, the lowest. At the top of the pyramid, we've got the ruler or king. In the middle of the pyramid, we've got ruling classes, so aristocrats or various tiers of nobility. And then at the bottom, we find the people. And Arendt says in this model, the source of authority always comes from beyond and above the pyramid. Again, the European monarchy might be a useful example where authority was understood to come from the Christian God. The king or ruler was God's chosen. God appoints the king. The king then makes laws or appoints people to different offices or stations, and the authority that those people have is derived from the king and ultimately from God. Now, tyranny is something different. Arendt says the tyrannical model is something like a pyramid, but the middle has been cut out of it. So at the top, you have a ruler or a tyrant, and then everyone else is equally powerless before the tyrant. Everyone else is equally oppressed by the tyrant's violence. Now, I think it's quite easy for an authoritarian structure to slip into or trip into a tyrannical structure. And certain political theorists like John Locke would probably argue that the space between an authoritarian government and a tyrannical government is almost non-existent. But still, I think the point here that Arendt wants to make, and I think it's a good one, that not every authoritarian government is necessarily tyrannical. Now, totalitarianism, Arendt argues, is something else entirely, and her image here is very cool. Arendt invites us to imagine an onion, and specifically she wants us to think about layers. In the totalitarian model, most of the authority is located in the center, and that authoritative center is insulated or shielded by successive layers of other less authoritative groups or party members. Arendt says that this onion structure performs a really important function. Thus, the sympathizers in the front organizations, whose convictions differ only in intensity from those of the party membership, surround the whole movement and provide a deceptive facade of normality to the outside world because of their lack of fanaticism and extremism, while, at the same time, they represent the normal world to the totalitarian movement. Every layer of the onion has two sides. There's the public-facing side and the party-facing side. As we get closer to the center of the onion, political positions become more fanatical and more radical. But when we think about these different layers of society in the totalitarian model, every group, every layer of the onion is next to people who are either only slightly more radical or slightly less radical. This has the effect of insulating people with radical, even dangerous political opinions, because they look around them and see that everyone more or less thinks approximately like they do. And people in the interior layers with more radical positions, they look around and think, well, my positions are really only, slightly more radical than the people who are around me. In the second half of this essay, Arendt turns to discuss authority's role in the history of political thought. And there's so much of interest in this part of the essay, I can only really give you the broadest sketch and outline of what's going on here. She does not explicitly or maybe clearly tell us this is what she was doing, but this is what she's doing. She begins with Plato, then she moves to Aristotle, then she moves to ancient Rome, then to the Christian world or medieval world, and lastly to modernity, which is represented by Machiavelli. Now, Arendt has particular readings of all of these different thinkers and historical movements, and in many ways they're idiosyncratic, so you should be aware of that her account of Plato or her account of ancient Rome is not necessarily the account of Plato or the account of ancient Rome. You should study these things yourself, you should study these thinkers yourself, and then you can determine whether or not Arendt is right about all these different things. But let me give you kind of a quick and dirty overview of this part of the essay. So Arendt begins with Plato. She always does. It always comes back to Plato. And she says that Plato was preoccupied essentially by two things. One is this self-interested concern that political communities are not hospitable for philosophy. And of course, Plato thinks that because his great teacher Socrates was executed by Athens. So Arendt reads all of Plato's work as this attempt to grapple with the problem of Socrates' trial and execution. How can the state be made safe for philosophy and for philosophers? That's the first problem. The second thing that Arendt thinks Plato was really concerned about is that we can't persuade people using reason. You've probably encountered this in your own life. There are just people who do not listen to reason. And these two problems are related, right? That Socrates was killed in a way because Athens would not listen to reason. Plato's project, at least in Arendt's analysis, was to find a way to make reason more authoritative. Plato's project was to reimagine reason as a thing people obey. The great image of this, of course, which Plato only ever meant half seriously, was the philosopher king. A philosopher who has the authority to make people obey reason. Plato does seem to have this aspiration for reason or rationality or ideas to become incontestable and therefore authoritative. So the important thing here is just that Plato locates authority in immaterial ideas. Next, she turns to Aristotle. Aristotle's great innovation, Arendt says, is that he found political authority could be based and rooted in nature. In his thinking, Arendt says, Aristotle leans hard on these natural and quasi-natural relationships like parents and children, teachers and students, and he uses those relationships as models for thinking about political communities. Think, for example, about Aristotle's account of the laws. Aristotle says that the laws should be used to educate the young people, to habituate them to virtue. And Aristotle also understands a political community as a natural thing. He describes us as political animals. So, Plato locates authority in immaterial ideas. Aristotle locates authority in the natural world. Now we turn to the Romans. The Romans, Arendt says, locate authority in the historical past. They point particularly to the founding of the Roman Republic and the great actions of their predecessors, their ancestors. They locate authority in history. In some ways, it's as if they turn Arendt's pyramid on its side, so that authority is located not upwards in the immaterial realm, but backwards in the past. Next, Arendt turns to Christianity. And this one is just kind of weird. Sometimes things are just weird, folks. Now, Arendt, of course, is not a Christian, and she's not very interested in metaphysics generally. She's interested in the political implications of Christianity. And in this section of this essay, she's particularly interested in the afterlife. And what's weird about this, a little strange, is that Arendt seems much more interested in hell than she is in God. And that feels a little bit upside down. Arendt says that perhaps the most important difference between secularized modernity and pre-modernity is the loss of this, and it's a political difference, that's important. It's the loss of this belief in an afterlife. She says the belief in future states, heaven or hell, that our actions on earth are rewarded, within political community, are rewarded or punished later, has enormous political implications. If citizens believe in heaven and hell, that grants authority to Christian rulers. Their word, their laws carry additional weight because the consequences of disobedience could be eternal. If we believe in these future states, that does influence how we are going to act. Now, naturally, if you're talking about hell and thinking about the devil, the next person that comes up is Machiavelli. And in this section of the essay, Arendt is talking about the modern world, and Machiavelli and his political theoretical innovations become the representation of the modern turn. But interestingly, Arendt believes Machiavelli's significance is not based on his ethical and moral flexibility. It's not that he's comfortable with deceit or murder. That's what we sort of know him for, but it's not what Arendt thinks is most important about his work. In this context, in this conversation about authority, Arendt says Machiavelli's real contribution is in thinking about the Roman model and imagining it could be portable, repurposed for new political regimes. Machiavelli posits in the absence of a glorious historical founding, a ruler could start his own revolution to create a new foundation for future authority. And Arendt then traces a connection between Machiavelli's argument and the great revolutions that define the modern era, such as the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And in the case of something like the American Revolution, you can see the Roman model at play. Think about the way that Americans talk about the founding fathers and founding documents. The whole founding process is mythologized. People in America still point back to that moment in order to understand, in order to chart a course for the future. This, Arendt would say, is exactly what Machiavelli was talking about. But this also reveals the key problem with authority in the modern world. The Machiavellian model creates a kind of paradox because we only seem to associate legitimate authority with the founding of something new. The modern world, Arendt argues, does not have reverence for reason, or nature, or history, or God, or the afterlife. We only seem to respect the authority of the revolution. The problem then is our pursuit of authority, our pursuit of legitimate authority, may lead us to revolution after revolution after revolution, constantly chasing that authoritative political model. Competing factions locating their authority in their willingness to violently overthrow established systems and orders. And this, Arendt says, takes us back all the way to the beginning of the tradition. We are confronted once again with the fundamental questions of political thought. Is there such a thing as justice, or is there only power? Can we use reason to work out rules for human communities? Can we rationally determine which laws are best and most conducive to human flourishing? Or are all laws merely arbitrary constructs of the strongest party? We thus find ourselves confronted with the very same questions which confronted Socrates and Plato. And that, I would say, is yet one more reason to read great books. Thanks, everyone. Talk soon.